All right, I think the influx of people has started to slow down, so I'm going to get started. I'm really excited to welcome you here today. Good afternoon. Today's webinar is entitled Improving Safety Climate for Hispanic Construction Workers. I'm Chris Kane, Executive Director at CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. As most of you know, CPWR is funded as the NIOSH National Construction Center. We had an opportunity to use some of our NIOSH award to partner with another group that I'm going to introduce in a moment to conduct a special opportunistic research study about reaching Hispanic construction workers and what works and what doesn't. So the team from the Carolina Center for Healthy Work Design and Worker Wellbeing at UNC was funded to investigate the current state of Hispanic construction worker safety climate and identify areas for improvement. And with that, I am going to introduce today's panelists. So on our panel today is Dr. Laura Linnon, and she is the director of the Carolina Center for Healthy Work Design and Worker Wellbeing. Maya Leff is the associate director. After their presentations, CPWR's Research to Practice Director, Jessica Bunting, will briefly share a few slides on CPWR's Spanish language resources. And now I will hand it over to Dr. Linnon to get us started. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a delight. I'm really happy to be with you today. And thank you so much for doing the Spanish translation. It's just a great resource for those that are attending, and we're really happy for that. In fact, we're representing a team that included a number of our students who were bilingual. And so Maya and I are both really happy to be here. And I think we're about ready to get started.
And I see the slides.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we can acknowledge our funding both from CPWR and from NIOSH as our overall center, and we'll talk a little bit about our center in just a moment. Our plan for today is to introduce our team a little bit and our study methods, but we're going to spend the most of our time talking about the results, like what did we learn and how can we make use of what we learned to really improve worker safety and health. And that includes hopefully some ideas for construction safety practitioners and potentially any researchers that might be involved, policymakers and others. So I don't think we need to tell this group. We could have had probably 20 slides that talked about how important it is to have a focus on Hispanic construction workers. But this one slide does tell the story, and a story that has persisted over time, which is the rate of fatalities in construction work is already higher than we would like and is a major focus for many people's work. But there is this disparity in that a disproportionate number of fatalities have occurred over time in the Hispanic construction worker population. Our project goal was to use what we are referring to as a total worker health approach to explore why Hispanic construction workers experience these higher rates of not just fatalities, but also injury at work, and to document from the workers' perspective what they know and understand about the safety climate at work, and capture and really think about and talk about and hopefully then apply workers' recommendations for improving safety at the construction site. What we hope you'll be able to take away from our presentation today are really 5 different recommendations. And the first is to adopt practices that really amplify workers' input to improve safety on the job. Having the perspective of workers, we think, is absolutely essential. Second, to ensure that projects are well planned. that they have the right tools and hire or train skilled workers. And this is workers at all levels of the organization. Third, that we will really need a focus on tailoring safety interventions for the Hispanic culture, for the economic stressors that many of these workers live with, and with the current immigration issues that surround all society in the United States at this point. And to remove language barriers with a focus on real-time interpretation in the field. And we'll have some examples of what we learned from this and really hope that this can be a point of discussion. And finally, that we hope that there'll be an opportunity to train managers and foremen to successfully navigate the cultural and language differences that we do know exist within this worker population. So in essence, we hope you'll take away a deeper understanding of why these issues are important to workers, and also some ideas about the types of solutions that workers are ready to support and participate in. So we heard directly from them, how can we improve the work environment? And that's really the focus of total worker health, is to focus on what can be done in the work environment to create a safer workspace. So a little bit about our process. We are in the midst of preparing a manuscript, so we'll be talking, we won't be talking about a lot of the details of the study itself, but you'll know enough, and if you have questions, we'll be happy to answer those, of course. But a little bit of background about us, who we are. As Chris noted in the introductions, we're the Carolina Center for Healthy Work Design and Worker Well-Being. We're in North Carolina. That's our dot on this map. And we are one of 10 centers of excellence that NIOSH has funded to focus on worker safety, health, and well-being using a total worker health approach. And you can see how these centers are spread out through the United States. We kind of have our main focus in the southeastern region of the US, but based in North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I want to show one slide that really, I think, captures what we mean and how we think about the total worker health approach. When we say that, what does that mean? There's clearly a definition out there for total worker health. But when we think about it and how we sort of organize the study is, if you look in the middle, we have a focus on the conditions of work, the physical environment, how work is organized, the psychosocial interactions that happen at work, interactions between managers, supervisors, foremen, and workers, and how work is designed, the pace of work, and so on. So we know that those conditions of work do drive, as that red arrow shows, the health and well-being of workers. So we know that if we want to focus on trying to reduce injuries and fatalities from construction work, that we need to think about those conditions of work as an essential element, not just focusing on the worker characteristics themselves. So that's important, and we know that we need to focus on the worker, but we also need to think about what's going on in the work environment. And that's really the essence of thinking about total worker health, that we focus on the conditions of work and that we understand, and we learned a lot about this in our study, how current employment and labor patterns and the social and political and economic environment that we live in all impact what happens in the workplace. So we have to be mindful of that, and we learned some things that we will be sharing in this presentation about that. So in essence, the total worker health approach engages with workers to design and implement and evaluate programs. So the start of this program, and woven throughout every aspect of it, is engaging with workers. Our methods that we used in this particular study was a survey of about 500 workers, was interviews that we did one-on-one with Spanish-speaking interviewers, and for those who preferred to do the interview in Spanish, and a photo discussion group, which is a kind of a different way of collecting data through images of what's happening in the workplace that illustrates for those who are not as interested or are less able to do interviews or do written surveys, for example. So photo discussion is just yet another aspect to illustrate key points that we need to emphasize as people are thinking about the safety of their work environment. We did this, all of these three methodologies were done in both English and in Spanish. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Maya Leff to really talk through at length what we found, what we learned.
Hello, everyone. So I will go ahead and share our data here, and I'll start with just letting you all know who participated in our study. So as Laura mentioned, we had 500 workers who completed the survey. And we were really trying to reach Hispanic workers and Spanish-speaking workers. And you can see that we were successful in this. So 72% of our survey participants were Hispanic workers who chose to take the survey in Spanish, Spanish-speaking Hispanic. 13% were Hispanic workers who took the survey in English or English-speaking Hispanic. And 15% were non-Hispanic workers who chose to take the survey in English or English-speaking non-Hispanic. When it came to the interviews, we saw a pretty similar breakdown. So we saw 67% of our participants were Spanish-speaking Hispanic, 20% English-speaking Hispanic, and 14% English-speaking non-Hispanic. For 51 folks. And then our photo discussion group, we had 5 workers who completed the whole discussion group. So we gave them a camera, they went and took photos around the site for a couple of days and then came back and we discussed the photos that they took. That discussion group was translated in real time, so it was in English and Spanish. And the majority of participants, 4 out of the 5, identified as Hispanic. One more thing I'll say about our participants. Everyone who joined us came from one large industrial construction site in North Carolina. But we did ask all of our participants to talk about their experiences across their entire career and not just focus on their experience at this one construction site. So the first piece of information that we want to share is that we do see in our sample disparities in injury rates. So our Spanish-speaking Hispanic participants in the survey were most likely to say that they had been injured or had a work-related illness at some point in the past year, with just over 2 out of 10 workers saying this had happened. In comparison, our English-speaking non-Hispanic participants were least likely to say in the past year they'd had a work-related injury or illness, with just about 1 out of 10 experiencing this. On top of that, when we asked workers who had said they had an injury, if they had reported that to their supervisor, only about half of injured Hispanic workers reported this injury or illness to their supervisor, compared to all non-Hispanic workers. So in one way, we're pleased to see that folks felt comfortable reporting their injuries honestly on this survey. We do know that Hispanic workers are more likely to experience injuries, but not always likely to report that, as you see. But of course, this disparity is something that we need to address. Against that context, we asked workers what can be done to make construction safer for all workers, and especially for Hispanic workers. And going through the results, I'm going to share with you the major themes that came out of our interviews, our photo discussion group, and on the survey, we also had kind of a free response box where participants could kind of share their open thoughts about safety and construction. So the first theme that came up was around improving communication. And that broke down into several sub-themes. So that included wanting supervisors who listen to workers' opinions and expertise, wanting companies that remove language barriers, and encouraging reporting by focusing on prevention, not blame, after an incident. When we're talking about this issue of supervisors who listen, here's an example of the kind of data that we saw. So one of our safety climate questions was, would you say that employers listen carefully to workers' ideas about improving safety? And you can see here that the majority of participants said that employers always or often listen carefully to workers' ideas about improving safety. However, we still have about a third who said that this was only sometimes or rarely or never true. One trend you'll see here is that our English-speaking Hispanic participants on the survey were more likely to say that this was a problem. And this is something you'll see kind of repeating, a theme you'll see repeating in our data as I present. We can also look at what workers thought about foremen, so not their employers, but their direct supervisors. So we asked, how often do you feel that you are ignored or not taken seriously by your foreman? Here, it's a bit of a different story. We see about half of workers, or in the case of English-speaking Hispanic workers, 2/3, saying that once a week or more, or a few times a month, they are feeling that their foreman is ignoring them or not taking them seriously. When it comes to workers' own words about what's happening here, here's an example of the type of comment which we saw. Supervisors should have more communication with their workers and know how to listen to their workers. Our opinions are also important, and we're always willing to contribute to our work. When it came to Hispanic workers in particular, there was an additional issue that was brought up around language. So one of our participants said, if a person is Hispanic and they say something, they don't believe him because he's Hispanic. But if someone who is white gives a suggestion in English, things are more likely to change. This is maybe because the English is better to explain everything that they are saying. So we saw workers throughout the study talking about expressing their concerns about safety or their ideas about how a job should be done, and feeling that their foremen were not always listening to this. And then for some Hispanic workers, this was made worse by a perception that it was difficult to be understood across a language barrier. When it comes to language barriers, here's an example of what we saw from our survey. Pretty sobering. So the question, language differences between me and my foreman put me at higher risk for injuries and/or accidents. And here we see that about a third of participants said that this is always or often true. As they experienced it, here's a quote from a Spanish-speaking Hispanic participants. In my opinion, from what I have seen, the leaders are Americans, and that can cause problems for Hispanic workers to feel like they can report a problem. Sometimes because of not knowing how to speak the language of the superintendent, or because of being embarrassed of not being able to communicate well, we think it is best to remain quiet. So we're seeing here not only concern that they won't be understood if they speak up, but also like an embarrassment or a hesitancy to speak up in the first place if they're not comfortable with the language barrier. And speaking of hesitancy to speak up, fear of retaliation was a theme, major theme across all three ways of collecting data. And fear of retaliation shut down communication. So for example, on the survey, when we asked what can be done to improve safety in construction, here's an example of a kind of response. Well, don't retaliate against people who have questions and give comments about unsafe things. That's why many people prefer not to say anything so as not to lose their job. From our Hispanic participants, Spanish-speaking Hispanic participants, we saw another nuance. So here's the quote. Hispanics tend to focus on delivering production that is efficient and oftentimes disregard safety to achieve this. Oftentimes, Hispanic workers may not report because they may be at fault for the accident for not taking safety measures in attempts to achieve production. So workers are talking about not only a fear that they could be retaliated against for just bringing up a safety issue, but that perhaps they may have been at fault for some accident because of trying to meet production goals. And they fear that if they tell, a supervisor about this, that instead of looking for a root cause, the kind of blame will end up falling with them. All right, the second set of themes that we saw in our data was about the importance of project planning and resources. So there were 4 themes that came up here. One about the importance of reasonable production expectations, how important it is to have access to the right tools in good working condition, having planning, organization, and coordination at the management level, and having a well-staffed, well-resourced, and active safety program. And I just want to take a moment here to point out that although we are talking about safety, the theme of this webinar, as you can see, so much of what workers communicated was about everything beyond safety. And this theme is a really good example of how these working conditions impact their safety on site. So here's an example of what we heard about issues with kind of the rush to production. Make it real that safety is on paper and in real life more important than productivity. Not just to preach safety, but behind doors, you want it no matter what to be productivity. We heard a lot of concern about the kind of conflict or contradiction between having safety meetings, but then as soon as you leave the safety tent, knowing that everyone expects you to rush to just get things done, and that creates a mistrust about the seriousness of the safety program on site. Hispanic workers also felt that this might be even more true for them. So here's an example. As Hispanics, we feel that we are pushed more. They expect more from us. I've seen that Americans can take breaks without getting in trouble. Us Hispanics, we don't feel comfortable doing that because of our different culture. So in addition to feeling like there's outside pressure, workers were also talking about feeling an internal pressure that pushes them to kind of keep going faster and not pay attention to safety. For tools in good working condition, another kind of conversation about contradiction. So don't just focus on the superficial, such as gloves, glasses, and vests. Safety also depends on the tools that the company provides us with, such as a duck jack. A lot of times, the tools and the machinery that we are provided with by our companies don't work well, and when we report it to our companies, they don't care. There are a lot of companies that I've seen this with. This discussion about tools that work and the right tools was very interesting. In interviews and in the photo discussion group, we heard about subcontractors, workers stealing tools from one another because of shortages, and lots of inappropriate kind of repairs to tools that were safety issues due to kind of chronic tool shortages. When it came to the issue of planning and coordination, workers were dealing with congested workspaces, as you see here, knowing how to organize groups in separate areas, and broken down communication between management parties. So for example, this worker wanting that the companies and the general contractor have communication amongst themselves and that they apply it so the information is not changing between different people. And then finally, coming to safety specifically, workers did want a well-resourced and active safety program. So that included regular safety training and talking about safety during other meetings. That included adequate safety equipment, so having, the gloves, the glasses, the harnesses that you need. And that included sufficient and really engaged safety personnel. We'll say a little bit more about this final point. So we heard things like assign full-time safety personnel in each area, not on a rotating basis. On a larger site, workers worried about the time that it took if they had a safety question to go, find rotating safety, go ask that question, were less likely to ask that question if there wasn't somebody immediately accessible. We also did see workers talking about the kind of benefit they felt from having somebody around and watching and making sure that that the work was being done safely. On the other hand, having safety personnel who either were not paying attention or perhaps were focused on superficial things was a negative for workers. So here's an example of that issue. They are focused on what makes them look good, as far as I've seen. The first thing they're looking for is to see if he got his gloves on or he got his glasses on. Safety people need to come out of this trailer, walk in there, and make sure that everybody is trained. We want to have safeties who are not just keeping track of PPE use, but really making sure that workers understand what they need to do in order to protect themselves. Our third big theme was around having a competent and well-trained workforce. So this meant wanting continuous job training, and it also meant wanting skills screening. So here's an example of how this theme played out. This is from our survey. I think that the level of skill of the workers that are coming into the industry right now is lower than it was just a few years ago. A lot of these guys come in and are carried by their coworkers to cover up the fact that they are very inexperienced, and this puts a lot of other people at risk. Maybe some of these companies hiring the people should give them some sort of basic training class before putting these guys out on a construction job. From the Hispanic worker experience specifically, we saw that this was really confirmed, especially from workers who were new to the US or who'd started their construction career abroad. So here's an example of that. Many of us arrive without experience to work here. The heights here are larger, the tools are more modern and very powerful, and you have to be trained well. In many places, they are not teaching us how to use the dangerous tools. So really an issue with not being prepared to do the job correctly, let alone safely, and being kind of put out on the work site in that condition. And we did see that workers noticed and appreciated foremen who refused to assign work that a worker was not prepared for and didn't have the skills for, and noticed when they had a supervisor who kind of threw them in just to get the work done, even if they had no idea how to use the tool. All right, then the last big theme I want to talk about is addressing Hispanic workers' unique safety issues. So a lot of what we've shared up to now were issues that affect all workers on the construction site and maybe had some specific nuances for Hispanic workers, as you saw. But the next issues I'll share with you were really specific only to the Hispanic population. So one was a desire to make sure that employers are equally distributing dangerous work. And one was to consider Hispanic culture economics, and immigration issues. So talking about unfair distribution of work. We did have in our survey, we did have a small set of questions about workplace discrimination and different ways that could play out. And here's one example, one question from that set. Question, how often are you unfairly given the jobs that no one else wants to do? I think it's interesting here that actually most of our participants felt this was an issue regardless of their ethnicity and the language they spoke. So the majority are saying that once a week or more, or a few times a month, this is something they're experiencing. With our English-speaking Hispanic workers being most likely to say that this is happening. Here is an example of how that was really experienced by some of our participants. So this is a Spanish-speaking Hispanic interview participant. And he said, if a supervisor asks a Hispanic worker to complete a task that might be risky, like climb up some high distance without the proper safety gear, if the Hispanic worker says, no, I can't do that, that the response for the supervisor will be, if you don't do it, someone else will. Which for me implies that I don't really have a choice because it feels more like a threat that I can be replaced. However, for non-Hispanic workers, if they were in a similar situation, supervisors will have a different response. For example, they will likely help these non-Hispanic workers find solutions to completing the not safe task. So we heard from our Hispanic interview and photo discussion group participants this concern that, as you saw earlier, they might be feel that they might be pushed harder, that they have less options to say no, that the supervisors won't really accept that they can say no if there's an unsafe situation that they point out. And that saying no, like the next kind of thing you'll hear back is, well, we'll fire you. We'll find somebody else to do this job, which is concerning as an experience that workers are having. Some getting kind of into the impact of Hispanic culture and how that played out. There was a small set of themes that came up. So one was an identity as hardworking. And I'll share some example quotes about that shortly. But essentially, as you saw earlier on, Hispanic workers have this value. A lot of them talked about having this value of doing the best job, getting the job done efficiently, and that this is really important to their identity at the workplace, and that they wouldn't be interested in changes that kind of threaten that or go against that. And they also kind of explain that this might be part of the reason why they get injured more often. We did see some comments about machismo. This was not actually a major theme, but we did see some workers talking about Hispanic culture as one that, you know, if you fall down, don't complain, just get up and keep going. That it's not manly to tell your supervisor you have an injury if it's not something that really is debilitating. The issue of not having workplace safety in one's home country, that came up, as you saw in one of the quotes that we shared. But this were comments like, we're used to no one talking about safety where we came from. We're used to being fired if we bring up safety. We're not used to any of the safety protocols or tools. And so when we come here, it's a big adjustment, and that might explain why we don't always follow safety protocols. Another theme we heard about was the importance of being a family provider and potentially being the sole provider for a large extended family, which put a lot of risk on a worker and made them very unwilling to do anything that might compromise their job. We also saw some comments about living paycheck to paycheck, which might be more of an issue for workers who have recently arrived and have, no financial or other safety net. We did see this theme of fear of being replaced, that workers were threatened by supervisors that they would be replaced if they brought up safety issues. And then finally, we saw some comments about some workers being undocumented and how this would make them hesitant to report anything in case that would trigger medical care that might then trigger investigation into their immigration status. This was not a major theme in the study, but it was present for some workers. So here are some example quotes to kind of lay out what we were just talking about. We've come from below, where there's poverty, bad governments, and there's no work. We come with hunger for opportunity, and when we have the opportunity to work, we complete the work as best as possible. Hispanic workers compete amongst other workers, even with other Hispanics. Competition for the opportunity at the job, to look good with the boss, Hispanics get hurt more. And then finally, Hispanic immigrants put their job first so that they can provide for their families. Most of the time, they're the only person getting money here. Hiding injuries would keep workers capable of making money. So taking all of that together, we have a few recommendations that we will love to discuss with you all. I know we'll have some time for a question and answer. But quickly, our recommendations, as a reminder, there were kind of 5 big things that we recommend. One is to adopt practices that amplify workers' input to improve safety on the job. We'll go into some more detail on each of these. 1, to ensure that projects are well planned, have the right tools, and hire or train skilled workers. Tailoring safety interventions for Hispanic culture, economic stressors, and immigration issues. Removing language barriers with a focus on real-time interpretation in the field. And training managers and foremen to successfully navigate cultural and language differences. So here are some more details about these. So adopting practices that amplify workers' input. If you think back to the start of the presentation, we were talking about this theme that workers try and bring up safety concerns to supervisors or management and feel that they're not heard, or they're not heard or they can't be understood. And so there's clearly a need for kind of more of a practice or structure to make sure that there's communication coming from the worker level going up to foremen, to safety teams, and to management. One potential way of doing this is to organize worker safety committees that really promote a high level of worker involvement. So not just any safety committee, but one where there's high participation by frontline workers, and there's a way to continually get their input both on the problems and the solutions. 2 examples of programs that might be of interest to you all are the Arm for Subs intervention, which came out of the Harvard Total Worker Health Center and Northeastern University. The link is there, and I think Jess will also drop it in the chat. That's a intervention that was designed specifically for smaller subcontractors. So I think if you click on that link, I think it was done with like a 20 employee subcontractor that starts with collecting like what the needs are from workers, then brings together a committee that has at least one frontline worker on it to decide what the priority for change is going to be, and then plan how to roll out that change. And then once you've actually done your kind of safety change, that you do toolbox talks with workers a few times to get feedback about how it's going and whether it's the actual kind of change that they wanted and needed to see. Another great program is the Healthy Workplace Participatory Program. If you click on that link, you'll see there's a full toolkit, worksheets, trainings, lots of resources there. And in fact, I know that CPWR, and I'm sure Chris can say more, is looking into using this program specifically in the construction setting, which I don't think has been done before. But hopefully those could be some helpful resources for you all. Another suggestion that we got directly from workers, from our participants, was to establish all hands safety feedback sessions. So folks talked about having like once a month, a session where everybody on the site gets together, there's translation, and there's an opportunity for everyone to weigh in and talk about what the safety issues are and how safety program is going. And then, as you saw, there's a need to kind of strengthen foremen's ability to respond to worker input on safety. And a potential resource to look at there is the Foundations for Safety Leadership training that can be part of the OSHA 30, because there is some content there about helping foremen build their skills in active listening and engaging workers. The second recommendation, tailor safety interventions for Hispanic culture, economic stressors, and immigration issues. This is more of an open invitation. This is a huge area to work in. Just a few ideas. One is to encourage safety incident reporting, reduce the economic penalty. So you saw earlier these concerns about being the only family provider, about not having any safety net and living paycheck to paycheck. These are the kind of things that just make it financially impossible for workers to report, even if they're not injured or if they're not responsible. If there's any sort of policy of, stopping work for a couple of days to examine what happened, that's a couple of days unpaid. Potential ideas here could be like establishing an emergency fund amongst workers so that if a worker is injured or needs, if work needs to stop on a certain part of the project, that workers aren't left unpaid during that time. When communicating about safety, work on aligning messages with Hispanic cultural values around work. So we saw a lot about this identity is hardworking, proving that you're hardworking, showing your competitiveness with your work ethic. And it's just important to think about when you're framing safety messages to align with that value so that it's taken seriously. And then the importance of implementing supervisor trainings to help supervisors successfully navigate differences between Hispanic and American culture. Right now, there's not a lot in the literature about this culture issue in particular. So this is an area that's open for work, open for improvement. All right, removing language barriers. I think this is the final kind of recommendation that I'll go into detail on. Most of these are direct recommendations from our participants. So one, increase the number of Spanish-speaking supervisors. Want to have foremen, want to have leadmen, potentially superintendents who are bilingual, so that there's clear flow of information up the management chain. And one way potentially to do this is to develop hiring and training initiatives to increase the number of bilingual foremen. Two, as part of subcontractors' contracts, ensure an adequate number of bilingual workers on every team, and make sure that these worker translators are readily recognizable. For example, workers said, give these folks hard hat stickers for their helmets so everyone knows who to ask to help translate. Conduct important meetings in parallel, one in English and one in Spanish. And of course, ensure all essential documents are in English and Spanish. And finally, there were some requests to consider a targeted language training course like construction English, construction Spanish. All right, with that, I want to say thank you to our industry partner who were just an incredible partner in this project and really made it possible to speak with so many workers and really showed their commitment to safety. And of course, to the workers who dedicated their time to speaking with us. You can reach Laura and I. Our contact information is there on the slides. And if you want to learn more, we teach a graduate certificate in total worker health. We have 3 courses that you can see here, and you can read more about this work at go.unc.edu total worker health cert. I think with that, I will turn it over to Chris for our Q&A.
I'm sorry, I think Jess is up next.
I'm not going to go through all of my slides because we only have about 11 minutes left, and I don't want to take away from the opportunity for Q&A, but I did just want to briefly point out that I have slides with a bunch of links in the slide deck that I put in the chat. We have a very deep website at cpwr.com, and we try to do as much as we can in both English and Spanish. As you navigate the website, you will find our Spanish resources side by side with our English resources, but one really easy way to navigate to them is just by going to the homepage on cpwr.com and clicking on the list of resources. We try to keep that up to date. I've also linked to a few different collections of resources that we have in the slides. And a couple of websites as well. So including our safety climate assessment tool, you can do that in both English and Spanish, and English and Spanish combined. Like you can do it so that you're doing it with English speaking workers in English and with Spanish speaking workers in Spanish. We have a ton of stuff on fall prevention. I saw that come up in the chat as a topic that needs more training, and especially more hands-on training in Spanish. And then the last thing I want to say is obviously we're doing simultaneous interpretation today. And that is something that we've started doing more recently, but we actually have, prior to that, we've done a number of webinars and videos in Spanish. And so we have a YouTube playlist with about 38 videos total. 23 are originally in Spanish, and then about 15 so far are webinars that we've done with the simultaneous interpretation, and so they have Spanish audio only. So this is just an example of one of those. And I know that I was probably talking too fast for the simultaneous interpretation, but I just wanted to hand it back over to Chris now so that we have time for some questions.
Ooh, Jessica. Yeah, you were talking fast.
I know.
And we apologize to the translator. We have received so many questions. I've been trying to keep track of them. And we obviously won't get to all of them. I think Denny Dobbins, who's on our technical advisory board, asked enough to keep us busy for the next hour. But I was going to share a couple. I wanted to flag 2 things I put in the chat. One, in addition to all the resources that Jessica threw in there, I popped in an OSHA website that is a construction safety English language and Spanish language kind of mini dictionary and I did that in response to one of the questions that came in. And I also popped in our one of our amazing latest and greatest tools that we are in the process of completing at CPWR Chartbook. We have a page on demographics in the construction industry because one of the questions that came in asked about the number of roofers versus laborers versus operating engineers, and that information is on the page. It's an interactive page, so you can go around and play with the information, all for free, but not for free. Yes, you can save the chat. You go up to the top, right click and hit save, and Jessica will send out all the links afterwards. Oh wait, I forgot to post the Chartbook one. So I'm obviously really overwhelmed. I'm really happy with this study. I keep saying all of this is for free. This webinar is for free. Our resources are all for free, but they're not for free. They're all supported by NIOSH. And before we get into the questions, I just wanted to remind folks of that. The study is supported by NIOSH. Somebody said we need to do more studies like this in different states. Like, let's find the funding to do it, because we want to do these kind of studies and we want to produce as much information as we can to stop workers from dying, and that's the heart of what we do. So I'm going to jump to the questions. How can you overcome language and cultural barriers that affect workers' ability to fully engage with safety training? And tons of questions came in like this, Laura and Maya, but the idea is about how can you share comprehension, that there's no one Spanish language, there are many dialects of Spanish. So what are some of the tricks to overcoming some of these barriers?
I might start and Maya jump in. I do think one of the, we didn't say it was a theme, but there's a lot about trust building in all that we heard, that if there's some foundation of trust between the workers and their managers, and we didn't mention unions, but there's some great resources about unions here in North Carolina. We're a right to work state, so we do not have much in the way of union, but that's a whole other category of initiatives, right? But trust building on the job, it has to be some level of foundation and identifying individuals who, and I love the comment, in so many great comments, by the way, biliterate, not just bilingual. And we will make sure in our final report and the manuscript, we say that, because we actually think that way. To be able to have some level of communication that starts with what's happening at this specific job site at a specific time, and having resources there to do troubleshooting in the moment. That doesn't happen overnight. That happens with the all safety meetings that then get translated out with individuals who can be on site or be on call to be on site, in the moment. So that's just a start. I know Maya's got some other thoughts.
Yeah, to that, I would add, we heard so much about the importance of the relationship between workers and foremen, and that's where there really can be that kind of breakdown in safety communication and breakdown in reporting, breakdown in asking for what they need for safety, and that there was very often a language barrier there. And so that was where that recommendation that we heard from folks, best if you can make sure that there's someone bilingual on every team. Better if that bilingual person is actually your foreman or your leadman, someone who has some authority. And I think kind of working with our partner, they had the idea to talk about, companies can be really actually try to train workers up into foreman positions who are bilingual, or train their foreman to be bilingual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I just want to put a plug for an idea that those handouts that you mentioned that have, key words for construction in Spanish and English could be a foundation piece for an actual training. I love the idea of getting the Hispanic workers to be trained up as foremen. That is an immediate trust building opportunity, but then to include for all foremen some kind of basic like we have in healthcare. Healthcare has Spanish speaking trainings for healthcare workers. There could be that for construction workers. And I think it would make a real leap forward if we could try out an opportunity like that as some kind of pilot project somewhere.
I think that's really important, and we'll definitely save the chat for the presenters too, because there's so many wonderful observations of people who are safety managers or are construction company people working with Hispanic workers, and the challenges they face, as well as some successes they can share. I wanted to ask you to clarify, in this case, what did you mean by Hispanic? Because Hispanic means different things to different people.
Yeah, so workers self-identified, and I think I saw like a chat in there about like, is Hispanic American? What does that mean? So at the start of the interview and at the start of the survey and the photo discussion group, workers could say, do they identify as Hispanic or not? We didn't ask about country of origin, although people shared that that's very important to how they relate with coworkers. For this study, we just kept it at the level of Hispanic, non-Hispanic. And then we asked, what language would you prefer to interact with us in? And so that's how we got the 3 groups of Spanish-speaking Hispanic, English-speaking Hispanic, and English-speaking non-Hispanic. Where someone's kind of citizenship was, we of course didn't ask, it wasn't a major focus of ours, but I will say that 80% of folks who were Spanish speaking Hispanic said that they were born outside of the US. About 50% English speaking Hispanic were born outside of the US, and I think about 20 or 30% of English speaking non-Hispanic were born outside of the US. So there is some also relationship to where people were at least born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to add one
Okay.
other, I'm sorry, just one quick thing. When Maya was reading, she was reading a quote that said, when an American does this or versus when a Hispanic person does this. So she was reading a quote of that's what the worker said. This wasn't our perception of, the situation, but really it was what the worker said. So we were reading that quote back. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for that, because as I was trying to keep track of some of the
Yeah.
questions, I kind of missed that nuance, which I think is important.
Yeah.
And just to add one layer onto it, we have been successful in doing the data analysis around injuries and fatalities as it relates to Hispanic workers versus non-Hispanic workers, white Hispanic workers, Black Hispanic workers, foreign-born Hispanic workers, English-speaking Hispanic, all of the categories of those. And we have all of our information is available on our website. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now. Although I wish we could keep going, because, as I said, one of our advisors has asked about 4 really important questions. But like every webinar, we run out of time, and we'll keep track of these questions to try to inform our future webinars. Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Jessica, and our translation team. We really appreciate your time and effort to make this a successful webinar. And thanks everybody who joined in. All right, have a great afternoon.